I think most of you know Bud Hulsey because he is the state rep for Kingsport in the Tennessee House of Representatives, and we're very pleased to have him here today. But I'm going to tell you some stuff you don't know about him. He's a graduate of Durango, Colorado High School, and then in 1967, which just happens to be the year I graduated, DB, and he was on the recommendation of his ministry, went on to Bob Jones University, and in 1972 he got a degree a bachelor's degree in education at Bob Jones. Came to work for the Kingsport Police Department in 1977, retired after 36 years as a police officer as a watch commander and lieutenant. And watch commander has to be one of the toughest jobs in the police department. And he did it. I can tell you, happened to be there part of the time. He was an outstanding police officer, and we appreciate your service, Bud. What you don't know, probably a lot of you, because it is way back there in the 80s, Bud became the Kingsport Drug Abuse and Resistance Education person, which was DARE. It was the first initiative in that particular area. He was so good at it, partially because he built a talking car called Pete to help get across to the youth of the community, that he was invited in 1983 to the FBI Academy to speak to the FBI Academy faculty and staff. And they taped that and sent it to every FBI country. He spoke at 44 conferences in 44 different states. So he was a speaker all over the country. But what you don't know also, he's a pilot. He's been an avid pilot. He's on a trucking company on the side, and just been involved with a lot of different things before he got elected to the Tennessee General Assembly 2014. And he's in his 10th year. We're very pleased to have you today, Bud Hulsey. Please receive.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell. I appreciate that very much, and thank you for inviting me here. Thank you for the food, especially. I love to eat. Somebody said I was getting so big my bathtub has stretch marks, and that's probably true. It's so good to see some of you that I've known for years and years and years and years. I appreciate your friendship over the years. My old chief, Mark Addington, we worked together for a long time in the department and saw some interesting things. One night on graveyard shift, we arrested Tammy Faye Baker, actually, and got her back in the jail and washed all the makeup off and found out it was really Jimmy Hoffa under there. Dave Light has been a friend of mine for a long time. Most of you probably don't know. He recently was at the doctor, and the doctor took his car keys away and said, "You cannot drive anymore." About 2 weeks later, he went over and picked him up, and his wife said, "You can't do that." And he said, "The doctor doesn't know anything," and he went out the door and left. And she was listening to a radio broadcast, and an announcer came in and said, any motorist on I-26, be careful, there's a car going the wrong way on I-26 northbound. And so she called him on the cell phone and said, "You better be careful, there's a car going the wrong way on I-26. He said, "One car, heck, there's hundreds of them." He's been a friend of mine for a long time. I thought I'd share with you some things that maybe you don't know about the General Assembly. People wonder why in the world you can't go down there and just pass a bill and get it done. Well, it's pretty much more complicated than that. And there's a lot of things that can stand in your way and block it. And there's a lot of hoops that you got to jump through to get there that most people don't realize. Every state representative is allowed 15 bills. There's 99 representatives in the state of Tennessee. So last year, for example, this past session, you end up with 1,400 and something bills. So you can do one or two things. We have a committee process, and that's the biggest reason for the committee process is to get rid of bad bills. If you didn't do that, of course, every bill would have to come up on the House floor and be debated on the House floor, and you would be down there all year. So you go through the committee process. Most committees have a subcommittee that works its way up to the full committee. I'm the chairman of the Criminal Justice Full Committee down there. There is a Criminal Justice Subcommittee. So things dealing with criminal justice will go to the subcommittee first. And it'll be presented by whoever the sponsor is. And if there's somebody to speak against the bill, they'll be there. And if there's somebody to speak for the bill, they'll be there. And you present it in front of this committee. The process, of course, is to weed out bills that you don't want, and bills that aren't any good, and stupid bills. And trust me, there's a lot of stupid bills. And trust me, we have passed a few stupid bills. I don't want to mention any of them today, but we have done that in the past. And I got to tell you that when we're on the House floor and we're voting on like 50 bills getting down to the end, and I have tried to cram my head full of what all these bills do and what they don't do, because half of them did not come through my committees, and it's not a committee I'm on, so I have no idea what this bill is about. And then you also have amendments that have been hung on it in committee, and to read those, and there have been times I've been caught on the beach with no trunks and wasn't ready, and I voted the wrong way. I mean, almost everybody has done that. You start off with 1,400 bills. Now, there's other mechanisms. If the governor doesn't like your bill, he flags it. Doesn't mean you can't beat the governor, because you can, and I have on occasion, but it's an uphill battle, because everybody knows it's right there in front of them that the governor doesn't like this bill and he flagged it. Now, the governor doesn't have to sign a bill if the legislature passes it. He has 15 days to sign it, but he doesn't have to sign it. If in protest he doesn't sign it, at 15 days it becomes law anyway. But you also have leadership, Republican leadership. If they don't like your bill, you've got an uphill battle to get it done. If they like your bill, then you're probably going to get it passed. I run into things sometimes when the leadership likes a bill and I don't like the bill. And I'll give you one of these, because this is a kind of a picture of how I think and what I think. There was a new representative brought a bill in my committee that said if a person slaps a police officer on a misdemeanor assault, that it would jump it from a Class A misdemeanor, which is what it is now, to a Class E felony with a $10,000 fine. So when they presented the bill in front of the committee, I argued against the bill from this perspective. And I said, I think what you're doing is admirable in the sense of you're wanting to defend police and protect police, and I was one for 36 years, so I understand that. But what you're doing fundamentally is wrong. Let's say there's a police officer standing outside the post office up here talking to a lady, and a crazy guy comes by, and he slaps the lady in the cheek, and then he slaps the police officer in the cheek. If you pass this bill, he gets 1129 suspended and a $300 fine for Class A misdemeanor for slapping the lady. But for slapping the police officer, he gets a mandatory $10,000 fine, and it's bumped to a Class E felony. What have you said? You have said by law, and we're going to put into code, we're going to put this in statute, that law in Tennessee is not equal anymore. That the policeman's cheek is worth more than the lady's cheek. Now the blindfold's off the lady, and by statute our law is biased. Those things trouble me deeply. Leadership liked this bill, and they wanted this bill. By the way, that's another way that you can get hurt, is every bill goes to physical review. And they work very hard at saying what this is going to cost the taxpayers of Tennessee. And then they will put what's called a physical note on that bill that says, if you pass this bill, this is what it's going to cost. Well, if you can't find a way to pay for it, or you can't get leadership to adopt it, or it's not something the governor wants, it's not going to pass, because when it goes to Finance Committee, they're going to put it behind the budget, and it won't pass unless you've got some juice with the Finance Committee to get it out from behind the budget when you've got this little pool of money left over when the budget cycle's over. So in this particular case, this bill had a $1.6 million fiscal note on it. And I thought to myself, well, that'll get killed in finance. But it did not get killed in finance, because leadership wanted it. So if you run a bill that leadership likes, you're ahead of the curve. If you run a bill that leadership doesn't like, it's a bigger uphill battle for you. You can still get them through even if the governor flags your bill and doesn't like it. I had a bill that he flagged and did not like. Back in COVID, I passed a bill. I had to work at it. I was 3 or 4 times in front of the health committee over this issue. But it was a simple little bill. It said that no city, state, or county in Tennessee can force somebody to take a COVID-19 shot against their will. Now, I should not have to run a bill like that. You know, the sovereignty of an individual should be so permanent in the state of Tennessee that I don't have to run a bill like that. But this bill, it got fought by the health folks and the health department people and the Tennessee Medical Association, and all of them fussed and fumed about it. And I still pleaded that a man has sovereignty over his own body. And you can't take a public works guy who works for the city of Kingsport and make it a condition of his employment that he take a shot that he doesn't want. And the governor flagged it, didn't like it. TMA didn't like it, but I still got it passed. And it became law, and it kept a whole lot of firemen and teachers and a whole lot of folks from having to take a shot they didn't want. I want to cover just a few bills that probably didn't get any fanfare, but I think that it was really, they're good bills. Well, I don't know if you've dealt with ESG or know anything about it. It's environment, social, and governance is what it stands for. And a lot of financial institutions now have made this part of their rating on how it's going to rate whether they loan you money or not if you've got a business or you've got a small loan and you want to go. Now, instead of the old 5 C's on how much capital you got and you pay your bills, and a financial way of looking at whether they're going to loan you money, they can factor in this ESG scoring to see environmental, if you bought into the radical climate change agenda, and what are you doing about it? And S for social, do you promote homosexuality in the workplace and transgenderism and those kinds of things? And governance is, do you have policy that sets up these kinds of things to promote that? And if you got a rotten score, the bank won't loan you money. If they do loan it to you, they might loan it to you at an interest rate that's much higher. Insurance companies have started to get into this ballgame too. And I don't blame local folks for any of this, because a lot of this comes from CEOs who have bought into a woke ideology, and that's what they push. But we ran a bill that clipped the feathers off of ESG scoring. And I think that's a great thing. It's another one that doesn't affect us here so much because we have a good DA, but there are places that don't have such good DAs. And we've had cases with child sex trafficking where a DA refused to prosecute. So we passed a bill that says any bordering district, you can go to that DA and get them to prosecute the case. There was another bill that we passed that got a lot of mockery to it. It was a geoengineering bill. And it said that you can't either shoot off from the ground and you can't disperse from aircraft anything with an attempt to mitigate or change climate or cause it to rain. You would be surprised how much cloud seeding really is going on with aircraft. And they use particles of aluminum to do that. We passed a bill saying you can't do any of that over the skies of the state of Tennessee. It's the first state that ever did that. We took a great deal of mockery from the Democrats over that, by the way, until about 3 weeks later when they shot that deal off over there from that old abandoned aircraft carrier in San Diego, trying to reflect the sunlight back off the water, and made most of California mad. And so then we didn't get mocked so much. The big bill probably that got the most attention was a bill that said no doctor in the state of Tennessee can cut off healthy body parts off of a minor in an attempt to make them the opposite sex, nor cram medicine down their throat to try to aid that. There was some folks hated that bill, but 25 years ago, I would never have thought that there was even such an issue. And I wouldn't have thought that we would have to pass a bill like that, but we did. It'll go to court, of course, and maybe be lined up for it now, but we did pass that. We made it a crime, which is another interesting thing. We made it a crime for an adult to take a minor someplace, either in state or over state lines, without parental consent for another adult to take a minor over state lines to get an abortion. We also made it a crime if an adult took a minor without parental consent in the state or out of the state to do transgender surgery or transgender treatment. It was also a crime as well. Planned Parenthood hates our guts over that bill. There was another bill I really liked too. It said that a school system or city cannot prosecute or bring harm to or cause any harm to come to a teacher who uses the pronoun for a kid in a class that's on all the paperwork where the kid was enrolled in the class. In other words, if on his paperwork it says he's a he and the teacher calls him a he, the school can't bring any adverse action against him because the kid wanted to be called a she, not a he, and he called him a he. It also gives protection from lawsuits for the teacher as well. I was really glad about that. I don't know if you know this or not, but credit card companies have started a separate database that records your purchase when you purchase a gun. And it's its own separate database that has got your information and the fact that you purchased a gun. I didn't even know this was going on until we started talking about this bill. And we ran a bill that all credit card companies that operate in the state of Tennessee cannot do that. Isolate you out and show what you purchased as far as a weapon goes. You don't do that with anything else. It's all lumped up into generalities like lawn and garden or something like that. So most people don't know that was even going on. But I don't know what the plan is to do with the database that they had, but they can't do it in Tennessee anymore. Education-wise, we voted in the largest salary increase for teachers in the history of the state. By 2026, the base pay will be $50,000. We gave the largest tax cut in the history of the state of Tennessee, $800 million. And that was made up of because we changed the business tax and because we changed the guidelines for the franchise and excise tax. So two biggest financial things in the history. I want to talk about certificate of need for just a second. I ran a bill last year to do away with certificate of need altogether, and I failed in the first committee. That was another one of those things that who wanted and didn't want. But this year we did pass certificate of need, and I don't know if you know what that is. In the medical field, if you wanted to build a surgery center, you can't just build a surgery center. You have to go down to Nashville in front of the certificate of need board and lay your cards out on why, and they ask you why you want to do this. And if you don't get permission from the certificate of need board, and of course all the other surgery centers in the area are going to be down there protesting you getting this because they don't want the competition. And so if they say no, you can't build it. And that applies to every medical facility, nursing home, and everything else. And of course it stymies competition, and it keeps you from getting a better product at a cheaper price. And so this year we did pass a certificate of need bill that will phase out most of the requirements on certificate of need over time. I think by 29, I think, is the last piece of that. I wanted to tell you about some of my bills so you'll know how I think. And you'll know where my focus is a lot of times. There are simple things that you can run that fix problems, and I like doing that. The sheriff right here called and said, he called me and John Lumberg, and he said, look, these patients with HIV, and I don't even know if you know this, when you got somebody in the Sullivan County Jail and they got a medical issue, it's Sullivan County taxpayers that pay for that. And I don't know if you know this, but if somebody's being treated for HIV, the medicine for HIV for one individual with HIV is over $3,000 a month. And it won't take long to bleed your budget dry if you have 2 or 3 or 4 people with HIV in your jail. So John Lumber and I ran a bill that said if you were receiving HIV treatment before you ever got arrested and put in jail, then you'll keep on receiving it. Whoever's paying it will keep on paying it while they're in jail. And because almost all those payments, unless it's private insurance, almost all those payments come from TennCare or from Ryan White Fund, which is federal money, but it's funneled through a state program. So bills like that, I like fixing stuff, but the things that are closest and dearest to my heart are issues that deal with liberty and sovereignty and the threat against this country that comes, it seems like when you look out on the horizon, it's in 360 degrees and it's coming from out there, moving very fast, coming this way, that threaten your liberty and threaten your sovereignty. And those kinds of things scare me a lot. And so I spend my time thinking, what can I put in place? What planks can I put in place to protect Tennessee people when that gets here? And for example, I don't know if you pondered very much a central bank digital currency. President Biden's in favor of that. The Federal Reserve's in favor of that, and their plans are to go forward with that. You do understand a central bank digital currency, when you do away with cash, when that system gets into place, there is no more cash. And that you have an account, and it's just numbers on a screen. It's numbers on your computer or numbers on your phone or numbers on a chip in your hand, and it's just numbers. But each individual account is programmable, which means if you are told that you need to buy an electric car in 6 months and you don't, your account can be programmed to where you cannot purchase gasoline in 6 months. If your ESG score is not what it ought to be and you're not complying, your account can be programmed to where it does not work past 2 or 3 miles of your house and you do not travel. If Bill Gates gets his way and everybody should be eating bugs and they want to do away with beef and chicken and hogs, and you don't buy into that, or you are restricted and everybody's told you can't purchase more than a pound of meat every 2 weeks, your account can be programmed to where it will not make that purchase except every 2 weeks. I've had people say to me, well, that doesn't matter because I got 25 acres down here and I got a cow and I grow a big garden and I got my own well and I think I can make it. And I would say, no, you can't. Because you have no mechanism to pay your property tax. And you'll lose your property. By the way, because of that, I ran a bill 2 years ago and got it passed. All the clerks are not into compliance yet, but they're coming that way, that says that Tennesseans can pay their property tax forward. And the clerk will run an account for you, an escrow account for you, where you can pay it forward as long as you want to. So if you have a financial crash in the future, at least your property tax is paid for and they can't take your house away from you. I had some other bills that were related to these kinds of things. One of them, you might not understand this at all, but if you notice with COVID, there was a mysterious genetically altered virus that came out. And you and I were told that it was caused from an ugly old bat. But Pelosi still maintains she had absolutely nothing to do with it. But at that time, then it came a great deal of fear. Everybody's going to die, even though statistically it has a survival rate of 99.3%. And then at the tail end of that came a miraculous new vaccine that turns out wasn't a vaccine. But it came out that was also genetically altered. I expect that same scenario to play out with cattle, beef cattle, and hogs and chickens. I don't know if you have looked at President Biden's 30 by 30 program. It is a plan to do away with 30% of agriculture by the year 2030. As preposterous as that sounds, that's the plan. If you dig around in climate change goals and objectives, if you look at the WEF, the World Economic Forum, and what they plan, go read it. If you don't believe me, just go read it. What their plan is for you. It's just preposterous. I mean, it's tyrannical. You lose your liberty and you lose your sovereignty. So what I expected was another system just like that to come out, a genetically altered virus to make it more dangerous than it would have been on its own, followed by a great deal of fear, and then followed by a miraculous new appearance of a genetically altered vaccine. And in the state of Tennessee, it's not like this in Alabama and some other states around us, but in the state of Tennessee a few years ago, or before I got there, the legislature voted that the state veterinarian in Tennessee can declare an emergency, and if they do, they can order a vaccine to be given to every animal you own. And failure to comply is a pretty hefty fine. What I expected, and if you read right now, if you're going to treat with a swine flu, for example, if you go read the recommended vaccine for swine flu, it will tell you right off the bat that when you give the shot, you will lose 10% of your herd. Within a very short time, you'll lose 10% more because their legs fail to work and they lay down and they stay there till they die. And then in a little while, you lose another 10% due to anorexia. So you're going to lose 30% of your herd right off the bat just by using a shot. I figured that system to come about because it was pretty successful the first time around. So I ran a bill last session that said, if you have cattle, horses, chickens, hogs, and you don't vaccinate, and your herd has herd immunity and you don't vaccinate, you don't have to obey this order from the state vet. Because I wanted pools of pure meat to be able to go back and replenish and grow out of that to keep people from starving to death. That got sent to summer study, which, by the way, is another way to kill a bill. All somebody has to do on a committee is say, I make a motion, we send this to summer study. Well, most of the time, nothing ever gets summer studied. This one did get sent to summer study, and I was promised that it would get a legitimate one. I hope it does. There was another bill that I ran that dealt with the UCC code, the Uniform Commercial Code. I don't know if any of you have read the book by David Webb called The Great Taking. I recommend that if you haven't. This is scary stuff. Most people believe that if they own stock, they are a stockholder. But that's not the case anymore. In 1994, the UCC changed all that. You're not even called a stockholder anymore. You're called an entitlement holder. And most people think, including stockbrokers at the front end of where you purchase it, that your stock belongs to you. I mean, that's what I want to believe, and that's what I always believe, but that's not the case. All stock goes into a huge pool, and it is used as collateral for loans from the big banks, the banks that are too big to fail, like Morgan and Wells Fargo, those boys. If there is a default, the big banks come down to the pool and take the stock out. And you might go to bed and look at your computer and what your report is, and you got $229,000 in your portfolio, and the next morning you wake up and there's zero. Now, I ran a bill that changed two things in the UCC code in the state of Tennessee, and boy, they came out of the woodwork, let me tell you. People say that can't happen. It already happened. It happened in 2008 when Lehman Brothers went under. And the big banks came and grabbed stock. And there were thousands of people who woke up, just like I told you, the next morning with zero on their portfolio account. It took the smaller boys 5 years to get their money back, and they had to go to New York, hire a New York lawyer, and file a suit in the state of New York to start that process. The bigger boys, it took 13 years for them to get their money back. That's just on a small default. If you have a big crash, we're all hurt. This bill I ran just did two things. It said if you bought your stock in Tennessee or you lived in Tennessee when you bought it, then you don't have to go to New York. If they steal your property, you don't got to go to New York to file a lawsuit. You can file a lawsuit right here in the state of Tennessee. And the only other thing it changed, instead of the big banks being up here, number one on the top to get their money, it flipped that and said the original stockholder, which is you, is first in line to get their property back. Now, that passed the subcommittee with only one no vote. A week later, it goes in front of the full committee, and by that time, the folks who hate this bill were ready, and they brought in the two big dogs to deal with the UCC. And for 45 minutes, they told the committee how stupid this was and how insane it was, and that this couldn't happen, and everybody's protected, and not to worry, and you can't lose your property, and that if you pass this bill, people quit doing business with you. That got sent to summer study. I am promised that we are going to have a legitimate summer study, but that's all that bill does. Third one that I want to talk to you real quick about, so you can go home. I had 3 editorials to the Kingsport Times News written on this bill, telling me how crazy I was, not in those words, but it is a bill on nullification. And what is nullification? Well, nullification is not secession and it's not rebellion. It's not even negating a federal law. Nullification is saying to the federal government, we want you to play by the Constitution. And it's saying to the federal government, we're going to ignore this rule or this edict or this law if it's unconstitutional. We're going to ignore that state of Tennessee, and we're not going to spend any money of taxpayers' money in Tennessee to try to further it along or use manpower to help it. Now, law school boys, some of you law school boys, you've been taught that actually the Constitution is not supreme. The Supreme Court's supreme. And it's almost ingrained in us that the Supreme Court is the only one who has the power to interpret what the Constitution means or decide what's constitutional or not constitutional. We've been taught that for so long. It's ingrained in us, but that's not what the founders believed at all. As a matter of fact, if you want to ask who interprets the Constitution on whether it's constitutional or not, you will not find in the Constitution anywhere that is the job of the Supreme Court. I also want to show you something else. Most people talk about their God. They want to say, I have constitutional rights. You don't really have constitutional rights. You have God-given rights. The Declaration says all rights for man come from God. The Constitution doesn't bestow you rights. The Constitution was written to be changed to bind down a federal or central government so they would not become tyrannical. Go read what they said. You understand the Federalist Papers and Anti-Federalist Papers. The Federalist Papers, there was a group of Federalists who wanted to establish a small central government that would be bound down by a constitution that had very limited powers. Anti-Federalists didn't want any constitution or any federal government or central government at all. There were Federalist Papers, they were called, written to editors of papers, newspapers in New York. And they were called Federalist Papers. They were written by 3 guys, Hamilton, Madison, and John Jay. And as questions came up from the states about what do we do with this and who does that and what if the government does this, And they would answer these questions and these concerns in Federalist, and they were numbered. Now, Federalist 63, I believe, is the correct one. I have to go back and look. The question came up, and actually Madison wrote this. Who can interpret what's constitutional, what isn't? And their thinking was two groups. One, the people, and two, state legislatures. Isn't that interesting? No place in the Constitution will you find at all that one of the jobs of the federal Supreme Court is to interpret what is constitutional or not. It's not there. As a matter of fact, Sotomayor, in the Dobbs case recently, here's what she said. I wrote down exactly what she said off of clip. She's talking to, in the brief arguments at the beginning, she says, counsel, there is so much that's not in the Constitution, including the fact that we have the last word. In Marbury versus Madison, there is not anything in the Constitution that says that the Supreme Court is the last word on what the Constitution means. She even admits it, that they are not the final arbiters. You got to understand, in the Constitution, they wanted a very limited central government. And in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, it tells what the federal government can do. There's about 18 things, and that's all. Go read them. These are the 18 things that the founders gave the federal government to do. It's their little garden. Then the founders all said, this big, huge garden out here that's almost unlimited belongs to the people of the states. So, of course, they wanted the federal government to hoe in their little garden and the states hoe in their big garden. That was the way it was. Now, people say, well, I'll shut up right here. People say, well, look at Calhounian nullification. Well, he was wrong. South Carolina in 1800s got mad because of a tariff law that the federal government had passed. And they thought they were being cheated. And so they said, we'll nullify that. But they can't. Because a law, by the way, the Supremacy Clause says that the Constitution is the supreme law of the land and laws made by Congress pursuant to it. In other words, the law that comes out of Congress has to be constitutional. It has to be the supreme, or the Constitution is still the supreme law of the land, but the law that Congress makes has to be constitutional as well. So in the Calhounian nullification, it was wrong anyway, because tariffs is in this little garden that the government can mess around in. So they shouldn't have tried to nullify that. But nullification's been done on many, many other cases. In the last few years that you've been alive, there are about 25 different federal laws dealing with marijuana and the growing it and smoking it and possessing it and selling it and carrying it. And as of right now, I think 21 states have said to the federal government, this is not one of your 18 things. You criminalized it. We're not. We're decriminalizing it. We're going to grow it. We're going to tax it. We're going to sell it. We're going to smoke it. And 21 states have nullified about 20 or 25 different federal laws dealing with marijuana. So this bill does not make the legislature do anything. It just says, if you decide to nullify, here's 5 ways to do it. And that's what my bill did. I'm not a conspiracy person, or at least I didn't start out that way. But I'm to the place where I don't really trust anybody anymore. I had a prostate exam 2 weeks ago. It's the first time my dentist has ever done that. So I'm just to that place.